Hello again. Today I'd like to discuss aggregate planning. This is planning of production generally for 6 months or about a year out in the future. And this is problem number 14 from our textbook. So in this example we're producing water skis. And we've forecasted our demand for 4 quarters out into the future. And for the first quarter the demand is projected to be 50,000 units, pairs of skis. Quarter 2, 150,000, quarter 3, 200,000, quarter 4, 52,000. Let's assume that the data we have is that the inventory carrying cost is $3 per pair of ski per quarter. The production, the normal production per employee is 1,000 pairs per worker per quarter. Our regular workforce is 50 workers. Our overtime capacity is 50,000 units, pairs. Our subcontracting capacity is 40,000 units. Our regular cost of production is $50 a pair. Cost of overtime production is $75 per pair. And the cost for subcontracting it out is $85 per pair. So they've asked us to use the transportation method to figure out to what extent and when we should produce and use subcontracting. So over here, this is our period of production. And on the top, we've got the period of use in this tableau. The first thing that you need to do is figure out the costs. So in production period 1, we've got regular, overtime, subcontracting. The regular is 50, 75 for overtime, 85 for the subcontracting. And as we move it over then, those costs will increase by $3 because we have inventory carrying costs for one period. So it goes from 50 to 53 to 56 to 59, and so on for all the other costs. If we produce it in period 2 and use it in period 2, we incur the cost of 50 for regular, 75 for overtime, and 85 for subcontracting. If we produce in 2 and use it in 3, then we incur that $3 per unit cost for carrying it over in inventory. Of course, it's not possible to produce in period 2 and use in period 1. That's why we have these X's here, because those are infeasibles. All right, so we start out with the demand for each period, quarter. We've got 50,000, 150, 200, and 52 for the 4 quarters, respectively. And then we say, all right, looking up here, our demand is 50 in period 1. What's the cheapest of the possibilities? Well, 50. And that's our capacity, so we can dot out all the rest. If we produce 50 in the first quarter and use it in the first quarter, these are no longer possible. Our unused capacity is 0, and we've used everything. Secondly, 150,000 units is our projected demand in the second quarter. So we look up and see, okay, what's the cheapest out of all these possibilities? 50 for producing in the second quarter and using in the second quarter is the cheapest. So we first put the 50 there. Then we look at the remaining possibilities. 75 is next, so we put the 50 there. And that's our capacity, by the way, for overtime and regular production. So we etch those out, put the zeros in there. And thirdly, the 78 is the next cheapest. That's producing overtime in period 1. And carrying it over in inventory and using it in period 2. So that takes care of the 150,000 right there. And that's all the unused capacity in overtime, so if we zero that out, nothing is left. So we put the little dashes in to show that those are no longer feasible possibilities. Third quarter, high demand of 200,000 units. We look up at the costs again. What's the cheapest? Well, the cheapest is regular production in period 3. So we put in the 50 there. Dash that out, it's no longer possible. 0 is the unused capacity. Next, what's the next cheapest? Well, the next cheapest is the 75. Overtime in period 3. Okay, so that gets us up to 100. What's the next cheapest out of all the possibilities? Notice that the 56 and 53 are etched out here with the dashes, so they're no longer possible because we used those back before. So let's see, where are we? We look at all the possibilities. We've got 100 so far. 85 is the cheapest, subcontracting in period 3, so the 40 goes in there. That gets zeroed out. So that's 140. We still have 60 left. The next cheapest is the 88, which is cost of subcontracting in period 2 and carrying it over one period. So that's 40, so that gets zeroed out. And we have 20 left. So the only possibility there is the 91, which is subcontracting in period 1 for 20 units and carrying it over for 2 periods. So that takes care of the $200,000 right there. All right, next we have demand of $52,000. So the cheapest is the regular production in period 4 for 50, and then overtime production for the remaining 2 is the cheapest, 75. So that leaves us with unused capacity of 48 units here, 20 units up there, and 40 units of unused capacity, 40,000 units of subcontracting that we're not going to use. So next we need to figure out the cost of this plan. So again, we've got our demand. We have regular production of 50,000 in all 4 quarters. We have overtime production in the first 3 quarters and 2 units of overtime production in the 4th quarter from the previous page. Our subcontracting, we have 20,000 units in period 1, 40 in 2 and 3 respectively, and 0 in period 4. So to figure out the cost, we've got the 200 of regular production, 152 of overtime, 152,000, 100,000 of subcontracting. Then we need to figure out the inventory that we're carrying over. So if we have regular production of 50, 50, and 20, we've got 120 units coming in the door, 50 units going out the door. That means that we've got to carry over 70 units into the next period. So if we've got the 70 plus 140 coming in, that's 210 minus the 150, leaves us with 60. And then if we've got the 140 coming in the 3rd period, add the 60 to that, that's 200. So we have no inventory left over at the end of period 3, no inventory left over at the end of period 4. So in total, we've carried 130,000 pairs over 1 quarter. So the total cost then that we calculate are 200,000 times 50 for regular production, 152,000 times 75 for overtime production, 100,000 times the $85 for subcontracting, and 130,000 that we carried over in inventory times 3, which is 30,290,000. So with this transportation model, it assumes that we cannot really expand our regular production by hiring and firing workers. Instead, what we're going to do is cover the fluctuations in our demand by using overtime and subcontracting. In the second part of this video, we're going to cover the level and the chase strategies, where we assume there that we can hire and fire workers to cover our fluctuating demand. That will be part 2 in the series coming up next.